Nia Carter sat quietly by the small attic window with her knees pulled to her chest, the last traces of daylight brushing against her smooth brown skin. The old glass blurred the outside world, but the truth had never been clearer. She wasn't a guest in her aunt and uncle's grand home. She wasn't even family. She was a debt, an inconvenience waiting to be traded away. It had been 7 months since her parents died in that terrible car crash on a rainy Friday afternoon. The news had arrived with a knock at the door, 2 police officers standing solemnly, unable to meet her eyes. Nia, just 19 at the time, crumpled to the floor, clutching the last photograph of her smiling mother and father, as if holding it could somehow bring them back. In a single moment, her entire world shattered. After the funeral, she was sent to live with her mother's sister, Aunt Monique, and her wealthy husband, Charles Carter. On the surface, the Carter estate in Atlanta was stunning. Polished marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, a staff that moved in silence. But beneath the beauty, there was no warmth. From the moment Nia arrived, she was treated as a burden. A reminder of tragedy that nobody wanted to keep. "She doesn't belong here," she overheard Aunt Monique whisper one evening, her voice sharp as glass. "She takes up a whole room. You know what we could do with that space?" Uncle Charles didn't disagree. He sipped his bourbon and stayed silent. Nia learned quickly to make herself invisible. She became a shadow in a mansion that was full of life but offered her none. But nothing could have prepared her. For the night she was summoned to the study. Charles sat behind his grand oak desk, fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. Aunt Monique stood beside him, pearls gleaming against her dark skin. Her smile cold. "We've made a decision, Nia," Aunt Monique said, adjusting her necklace. "It's time you contribute to this household." Nia's stomach tightened. "Contribute? What do you mean?" "You're going to be married," Charles said flatly, flipping through a folder without looking at her. Nia froze. "Married to who?" "To a man who values tradition," Monique replied, "and understands responsibility. Darius Langston." The name struck Nia like a blow. She'd heard it whispered in business circles, a billionaire, nearly 50, known for his ruthless reputation. Divorced, no children. A man with a heart as cold as the empire he'd built. "I don't even know him. I'm only 19. "I don't want to get married," Nia protested, her voice trembling. "This isn't about what you want," Monique snapped. "Your uncle and I have debts. This is your contribution to the family." "You're selling me," Nia said, the words bitter on her tongue. Charles didn't flinch. "You're being given a life most girls would beg for. Security, comfort, a future." "Misery," Nia muttered, standing to her feet. Her voice shook, but her gaze held steady. "You're marrying me off to a man older than my father was when he died." Charles stood, his calm tone carrying a dangerous edge. "You will marry Darius Langston in 2 weeks. The arrangements are made. The papers are ready. All you have to do is say, 'I do.'" "I won't," Nia said quietly. "You will," Monique replied coldly. "Or we'll send you to a group home. No college, no support, no protection. Your parents are gone, Nia. This is all you have." The words cut deeper than either of them realized. Nia swallowed the anger and humiliation burning in her chest. Her tears threatened to fall, but she refused to cry in front of them. "I'll run away," she whispered. "And go where?" Charles asked. "You have nothing. You are nothing without us." That night, Nia didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and desperation. Could she escape? Was there anyone she could turn to? The truth was, cruel, she had no one. 2 weeks later, wearing a wedding gown that didn't feel like hers, shoes that pinched her feet, and a veil that made it hard to breathe, Nia walked down an aisle lined with roses she hadn't chosen. The ceremony was private, elegant, and painfully hollow. There were no friends, no laughter, only silence, and the weight of a contract signed by trembling hands. At the altar stood Darius Langston, tall, composed, streaks of silver in his close-cropped hair, his dark brown eyes unreadable. He didn't smile when he saw her. He didn't frown either. He simply looked at her, cool and controlled, as though evaluating a business deal. Nia's knees felt weak. Her voice was barely a whisper when she said, "I do." The ring on her finger felt heavy. The kiss was brief, polite, and dry. And just like that, she was no longer Nia Carter. She was Mrs. Nia Langston. Later that night, as the limousine rolled toward the Langston estate, Nia kept her eyes fixed on the darkened window. City lights blurred into streaks of golden sorrow. Beside her, Darius sat in silence, calm and still, radiating a power she didn't fully understand. She didn't know what awaited her behind the doors of his mansion. She didn't know if he would touch her, control her, or leave her alone. But one thing was certain: she had just stepped into a cage that sparkled like a palace, and every breath she took felt like a countdown. The Langston mansion rose against the night sky like a fortress, its tall windows glowing faintly as if the building itself was watching. When the limousine stopped in the grand circular driveway, Nia stepped out slowly, clutching her bouquet, her breath shallow. The front doors opened before she even reached them, revealing a foyer so large it made her feel small. Marble floors gleamed beneath the golden light of a chandelier that looked as though it could have been pulled straight from a royal palace. Her heels echoed softly as she stepped inside, each sound making the silence heavier. A maid in a perfectly pressed uniform appeared, her face polite but expressionless. "This way, Mrs. Langston," she said quietly, her voice low and smooth. She didn't smile, didn't ask questions, only led the way down a long hallway lined with portraits and antique mirrors. Nia's eyes shifted nervously from the unfamiliar walls to the double doors at the end of the hall. The maid stopped there and opened one of the doors. "Your room," she said before disappearing almost as quickly as she came. Nia hesitated, her thoughts catching on the words. "Your room, not our room." Before she could process that, the quiet creak of footsteps approached. Behind her, she turned and saw Darius. He stood in the hallway without his jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms, the formality of the wedding stripped away. His dark eyes met hers, calm but unreadable, his presence filling the space like a storm about to break. Her heart picked up speed. She took a small step back, her shoulders brushing the doorframe. He noticed her movement and stopped where he was. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said in a low voice. It wasn't cold, but steady, controlled, almost gentle in its restraint. "Didn't answer." Darius glanced at the door. "This is your space. You can lock it if you want." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected that. She opened the door slowly and stepped inside. The room was larger than she had imagined, softly lit by warm sconces along the walls. A king-sized bed stood in the center, draped in deep velvet with a small fire crackling in the fireplace. The air smelled faintly of lavender. She turned back and saw him still standing in the doorway, his hand resting lightly on the frame, his eyes on her but his body held at a careful distance. "I won't come in unless you invite me," he said, his tone calm and deliberate. "This house is yours as much as mine, but your body will always be yours." Her throat tightened. She had prepared herself for demands, for control disguised as marital rights. Instead, she was met with boundaries. It unsettled her more than the fear she had carried. Darius stepped back. "There's a bell by your nightstand. If you need anything, water, food, or help, use it." She gave a faint nod. He inclined his head slightly and walked away. Nia stood in silence, unsure how to process his words. She looked at the door. He hadn't closed it. She crossed the room and pushed it shut herself, turning the lock, not out of fear, but because it was the one choice that still belonged to her. The night stretched endlessly. Nia lay in the bed in her wedding dress, staring at the ceiling, waiting for footsteps, a knock, something, but the only sounds were the quiet hum of wind outside and the soft crackle of the fire. Eventually, she rose and wandered to the window. The vast gardens below were bathed in moonlight. A fountain in the distance murmured softly, its water shimmering faintly. She hugged herself, her mind a storm of questions she didn't dare speak aloud. There was no sound of doors opening, no shift in the air, only stillness. Hours passed. Then, just as her body began to relax, there were two soft knocks on the door. Naya. His voice was quiet on the other side. I just wanted to say goodnight. She didn't answer. After a moment, his footsteps faded. The silence returned, but it felt different this time. It wasn't empty. It was full of something she couldn't name yet. Morning light spilled gently across the room, soft and golden, pulling Nia from a restless sleep. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then the reality of the previous day washed over her: the wedding, the drive, the locked door, and Darius's quiet promise through the wood. She sat up slowly, still in the silk nightgown a maid had left for her. The faint scent of lavender lingered in the sheets, as if it had seeped into the air overnight. This was her first morning as Mrs. Langston. A knock at the door made her tense. Breakfast is served. Madam came, a soft voice from the other side. She hesitated, then answered, I'll be down shortly. The dining room was unlike anything she had imagined. Dark oak walls, oil paintings of stoic ancestors, and a chandelier that glittered faintly above a table. So long, it could seat 20. But what caught her off guard wasn't the room. It was Darius. He sat at the head of the table in a charcoal sweater and black slacks. No suit, no tie. His silver-streaked hair was still slightly damp, as though he'd just stepped from the shower. A newspaper rested neatly to his side, untouched. When she entered, he stood slightly, his dark eyes steady. Good morning, he said, his voice calm, respectful. Nia managed a soft reply. Good morning. He gestured to the chair beside him. Not across the table, not far away, but next to him. She sat. The butler moved quietly to pour orange juice into her glass. Her fingers trembled faintly as she lifted it. I hope you slept well, Darius said, cutting into a piece of toast, but not eating it. I did. Thank you, she answered, surprising herself with the honesty of it. They ate mostly in silence. But it wasn't the silence she feared. It wasn't heavy. It was spacious, as if he was giving her room to breathe. After breakfast, she rose slowly, unsure what was expected of her. She braced herself for instructions, for a schedule, for rules to follow. Instead, Darius stood as well and walked with her toward the hallway. I'll be at the office most of the day, he said. Feel free to explore the house. There's a library, gardens, a music room if you play. Her brows lifted faintly. You don't want me to do anything? He tilted his head slightly. You're not here to serve, Naya. You're here to live. The words stunned her more than anything else he could have said. Later that afternoon, she wandered into the library. It was a grand room filled with rich mahogany shelves stacked with hundreds of books, classics, poetry, biographies, and worn novels with cracked spines. She trailed her fingers along the shelves until she found a familiar title. Wuthering Heights, the edges frayed. Settling into a leather armchair by the window, she opened the book, letting herself sink into the words. For the first time in weeks, her mind felt just a little lighter. Hours passed quietly until a soft knock at the door broke her concentration. She looked up, startled. Darius stood there, holding two mugs. May I come in? She nodded slowly. He stepped inside and handed her a cup. Chamomile. You looked deep in thought. I didn't want to interrupt. She accepted the mug, feeling its warmth in her hands. Thank you. He sat across from her, not too close, not far, with the fire crackling softly between them. I didn't take you for a Bronte reader, he said, nodding at the book. And I didn't take you for someone who drinks tea, she replied, before realizing how it might sound. But Darius gave a low, warm chuckle. Surprising her, she lowered her gaze, sipping her tea. The heat settling in her chest. You're different than I imagined, she murmured. His expression didn't shift, but his eyes softened. That makes two of us. Her eyes lifted. You don't seem like the kind of man who needs a wife, especially not one chosen for him. He stared into the fire for a moment, before answering. There are things in my past I won't speak of today, but loneliness is quieter than people think, colder. She said nothing, letting his words settle. I didn't agree to this arrangement lightly, he added. I almost refused. But when I saw your picture, there was something in your eyes. Something honest. You didn't belong in any of this, not the deal, not the lies. Her heart tightened. Then why did you say yes? She asked softly. He drew a slow breath, his gaze still fixed on the fire. Because I thought I could protect you from them, from the people who sold you like property. I didn't want to be another monster. Her lips parted, stunned. She hadn't expected that answer. The silence stretched between them, full of something she couldn't yet name. He stood, placing his cup on the table. I'll let you read. Dinner is at 7 if you'd like to join. And just like that, he was gone. Nia remained in the chair, the book forgotten in her lap. She didn't know what to think anymore. Darius Langston was supposed to be cold, calculating, controlling. Instead, he had given her something dangerous, kindness. It began with the smallest things. A folded blanket left neatly on the armchair, where Nia always curled up to read. The kind of gesture that didn't call attention to itself, but quietly lingered, that the mornings settled into a rhythm she hadn't expected. She would wake to sunlight pouring in through the tall windows, and for a moment, she wouldn't feel trapped or sold. She would just feel seen. Darius never entered her room without permission. He never knocked late at night. He never made demands, yet he was there in the details, in the small ways that were easy to miss if you weren't looking. One afternoon, while wandering the west wing of the estate, she stepped into the garden. There by the fountain was a small table, a single chair, and on it, a glass of lemonade with mint leaves and a plate of ginger and honey biscuits. The exact kind her mother used to make when she was little. She hadn't told anyone she liked those, not here, but someone had remembered. She sat at the table slowly. The sunlight warm on her skin, the flowers around her blooming in perfect symmetry. For the first time since arriving, she didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's life. She felt present. That evening, as she passed the library, she noticed something strange. A book had been placed on the center table. Little Women, her old copy from her childhood home, one she hadn't touched since she arrived. Beside it was a cup of chamomile tea, still faintly warm. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway. Was he waiting for her to notice? At dinner that night, she found the courage to speak. You remembered the ginger biscuits, she said softly, her gaze fixed on her plate. Darius looked at her from across the intimate dining table. His voice was steady. Of course I remembered. You mentioned them once. Her brow furrowed. When? The night of the wedding. You said your mother's baking always calmed you after nightmares. She blinked, surprised. She hadn't realized he'd been listening that night, when her words had been more a distraction from fear than a conversation. I didn't think. You were paying attention, she murmured. I always pay attention, he replied, his eyes holding hers just a moment longer than she expected. Later that night, she passed the library again and noticed the door was open slightly. Inside, Darius sat by the fire, turning something over in his hands. It was her music box, the one she had hidden in her closet, broken and forgotten. She stepped inside slowly. Where did you find that? He looked up. Your maid came across it while organizing your things. It wasn't working. Her voice softened. It hasn't played in years. He turned the small brass key, and a soft melody began to play the lullaby her father used to hum. Her breath caught, tears stinging her eyes. I didn't fix it myself, Darius said quickly. I just asked someone who could. I didn't want to intrude. She moved closer, the fire warming her skin, the music wrapping around her like a memory. I thought I'd forgotten this song, she whispered. He didn't speak, didn't touch her. He simply sat quietly as the music played, letting the silence carry what words, COULDN. Single quotes, TO10. After a long moment, she looked at him. Why are you being so kind to me? His answer came slowly. Because I know what it's like to live in a house full of people and still feel completely alone. Her gaze dropped, her chest tightening. That night, lying in bed, the melody still lingered faintly in her thoughts. She realized something unsettling. She was starting to wait for dinner not because she had to, but because she wanted to see him. The air was heavy with the promise of rain. Outside the Langston estate, clouds swirled low over the gardens, painting the sky in shades of grey. Inside, Nia sat curled in the library, legs tucked under her, a soft blanket over her shoulders. She held a book open in her lap, but she hadn't turned a page in nearly 20 minutes. Her thoughts kept drifting back to voices she would never hear again, to laughter that lived only in memory, two faces she could only see when she closed her eyes. Her mother's perfume, her father's Sunday pancakes, warmth that had been stolen in a single heartbeat. She didn't hear Darius approach, but his presence didn't startle her. When she looked up, he was leaning against the doorway, holding two mugs. "You're somewhere far away," he said quietly. Her voice was soft. "Yes and no." He stepped forward, placing a warm mug in her hands. She wrapped her fingers around it, letting the heat sink into her skin. The silence between them was familiar now. It didn't feel like absence. It felt like space, where she could breathe. "I lost my parents in a car accident," she said suddenly, her voice steady but low. 7 months ago. Darius didn't speak. He didn't rush to fill the air with empty comfort. He sat beside her and waited. "It was raining that night," she continued. "I was supposed to go with them, but I stayed home to finish an essay. I thought I was being responsible." Her voice wavered for the first time. "They never came back, and I kept thinking if I'd gone with them, maybe it would have been different, or maybe we all would have." She couldn't finish the thought. He didn't move closer. He just listened, his dark eyes holding hers without judgment. "The last thing I said to my mum was don't forget the snacks," she whispered. "That's it. That's the final memory I have of her." For a long moment, there was only the soft hum of the rain outside. "I was 8, Darius said quietly at last, "when my father told me I was a disappointment. He handed me a stock report and told me feelings were a distraction. He believed empathy was weakness." His jaw tightened slightly. "I spent my whole life trying to be what he wanted. I built an empire, bought everything he said I couldn't afford. But it was never enough. Not for him, not for me." Her voice lowered. "Did he ever tell you he was proud of you?" "No." His answer was calm, but the weight of it lingered in the air between them. Two pasts, different but broken in similar ways, sat side by side in the quiet room. "I always thought my parents would be there forever," Nia said. "They made me feel safe. But after they died, I realized how quickly that safety disappears. Aunt Monique didn't want me in her house. She wanted obedience. I was just a debt in a dress." He looked at her, then really looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. The words landed with more weight than apologies she had heard from anyone else. Her throat tightened. "I hated you," she admitted softly. "Before I met you, I imagined the worst. I thought you'd take everything from my dignity, my choices." "You had every reason to believe that," he said quietly. "But you didn't," she added. Meeting his gaze, something shifted in the space between them. "You make me want to be different, Nia," Darius said. His voice was steady, almost hesitant. "I've lived a life of transactions, deals, power. I've never had space for softness. But when I saw you, I didn't want to own you. I wanted to undo what they did to you." Her heartbeat thudded in her chest. "I didn't want to be saved." "I know," he said. "I just wanted to stop the bleeding." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her eyes searching his face. "You don't have to talk about it again," he said gently as he rose. "But if you ever do, I'll be here." As he walked toward the door, she spoke before she could stop herself. "Wait," he turned. "Thank you. For not trying to fix what can't be fixed. For just listening." A faint smile touched his lips. "Sometimes silence is the most respectful thing we can give someone." And then he left, leaving the warmth of his presence behind. For the first time, the past didn't feel like a cage. It felt like the place where healing might just begin. The rain came in steady waves that night, tapping gently against the tall windows of the Langston estate. Thunder rolled softly in the distance, Not enough to frighten, but enough to make the walls feel closer. Nia stood at her bedroom window, blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders, watching the sky split open in flashes of silver. The storm had a way of pulling at something deep inside her, something she couldn't name. The house had gone still. The staff had retreated to their quarters. The halls were quiet. Her room felt too still, too quiet. Her feet carried her into the hallway, the sound of her bare steps, muted by the polished wood. She found herself drifting toward the library. The doors were closed, but a thin line of warm light spilled from underneath. She hesitated, then knocked softly. There was no answer. She pushed the door open, just enough to see him. Darius sat near the fire, his shirt undone at the collar, a glass of amber liquid in one hand. His eyes were closed, his face softened by the flickering light. For a moment, he looked almost tired. She thought about slipping away quietly, but then his eyes opened. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low and roughened by stillness. She shook her head. "Storm?" he asked again. She nodded once. He gestured to the chair across from him, the one that, in an unspoken way, had started to feel like hers. She sat, the blanket still wrapped around her, her legs curling beneath her. He didn't speak, and neither did she. The silence between them wasn't empty. The fire crackled softly. Rain whispered against the glass. After a while, her gaze shifted to him. "Do you ever feel like the rain remembers?" she asked, her voice quiet. One brow lifted. "Remembers what?" She offered a faint smile. "It's silly, but I always thought storms carry echoes of things left unsaid." He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss the thought. "I used to think that too." Her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. "I used to listen to storms with my mum. We'd sit by the window and count the seconds between the lightning and the thunder." She said it was the sky thinking before it spoke. A small smile touched his lips. "That's beautiful." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Her gaze lingered on him. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. His expression didn't change. "What did you expect?" "That you'd treat me like part of the deal. Like something you acquired." His eyes held hers. "That was never my intention." "I know," she said softly. "Now I know." She hesitated, her thoughts moving faster than her courage. Then, slowly, she stood and crossed the space between them, stopping at the edge of his chair. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "May I?" He nodded once. She lowered herself gently onto the arm of his chair, her shoulder brushing his. The warmth of his presence seeped through the blanket, steady and grounding. He didn't move toward her. He didn't reach for her. He simply let her lean into him, slow and cautious, until her head rested lightly against his shoulder. She could feel his breathing beneath her cheek. Steady and calm, the faint scent of cedar and something warm and earthy surrounding her. "I don't know why I came," she murmured. "Yes, you do." He replied quietly, her eyes closed. He didn't ask questions. He didn't shift or break the moment. He simply allowed her to sit there, safe in a silence that felt more honest than any words could. They stayed like that for a long while. The rain softened outside, the lightning grew more distant, and the fire burned low. For the first time, she realized she wasn't afraid to be this close to him, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe she might one day choose to stay. The house was still, the kind of stillness that wraps around every hallway and room in the quiet hours of night. But inside Nia's room, sleep was anything but peaceful. It started with a flicker behind her eyes, rain on asphalt, the sudden blur of headlights, the metallic twist of a steering wheel, a scream cut short by impact, her mother's hand reaching for her hand, then nothing. Nia jolted awake, her breath sharp, chest heaving. The sheets were tangled around her legs, damp with sweat. Her hands trembled as she pressed them over her mouth, trying to muffle the sobs breaking free. But it was too late. The door opened quickly, the sound cutting through the heavy air. Near Darius's voice was firm but not harsh. He crossed the room in quick strides, barefoot, his shirt open at the collar, his eyes scanning her like he was ready to fight whatever had frightened her. "I'm sorry," she whispered through broken breaths. I didn't mean to wake you." He didn't respond with words. He knelt beside the bed, his hands hovering just for a moment, waiting for her to decide. When she gave the smallest nod, he wrapped his arms around her. It wasn't possessive. It wasn't rushed. It was steady, firm enough to hold the pieces of her together. She broke then, burying her face against his shoulder as the sobs came harder, her tears soaking his shirt. He didn't speak, didn't offer the usual comforts. People tried to give. He just held her, one hand moving slowly along her back in a rhythm that matched his steady breathing. "You're safe," he said finally, his voice low, a quiet anchor in the storm. Her words came out choked. "I saw them, my parents. I should have been with them. I should have." "No," he said gently, but firmly, "don't carry that. They died thinking I didn't love them enough." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. His thumb brushed away a tear. "They knew, Naya, they knew. Love like that doesn't vanish in a moment. And it doesn't end with them." Her breath trembled, her shoulders shaking. "I'm so tired of feeling alone." "You're not alone," he said, and the certainty in his voice startled her. He wasn't trying to save her, he was standing with her. Her eyes searched his face, seeing no judgment, no distance. His hair was slightly disheveled, his jaw shadowed, but his gaze was steady. Present, he reached for the blanket at the foot of the bed and pulled it gently around her shoulders. His touch careful and unhurried. "I didn't think you'd come," she whispered. "I told you I'd be here," he said softly. A single tear slid down her cheek, and his hand lifted, catching it. His palm lingered lightly against her face. She didn't pull away. Her own hand rose slowly to rest over his. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "So am I," he said quietly. "But I'm more afraid of watching you go through this alone." The silence between them was deep, but it wasn't empty. He moved to sit at the edge of the bed, his back against the headboard. She shifted closer, her head resting against his shoulder. Their bodies curved together like they had been here before, like they fit. Surrounded by the steady beat of his heart and the faint scent of cedar, Nia's breath began to even out. She didn't fall asleep because the pain was gone. She fell asleep because, for the first time in a long time, someone was there to hold it with her. The morning arrived softly, sunlight spilling in through pale curtains, like a quiet apology for the night before. Nia stirred slowly, the weight of a steady arm across her waist anchoring her in place. For a brief moment she forgot where she was, and then she remembered Darius, the nightmare. His presence through the long dark hours. She turned her head slightly. He was still there, not asleep, but quiet, his breathing steady. He hadn't left. Her chest tightened. She didn't move, afraid the stillness might break if she shifted. Her head rested just beneath his shoulder, close enough to hear the rhythm of his heart, strong, constant, grounding. No one had ever stayed like this before, not out of duty, not out of pity, just because. Slowly she lifted her head. His eyes met hers, warm but unreadable. "Morning," he said, his voice low, roughened from hours of silence. She managed a small nod. "You stayed, of course." She pushed herself up gently, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. He didn't reach for her. He didn't move closer. He simply watched, his gaze steady, patient. "I should get dressed," she said quietly. He nodded, standing slowly. At the door he paused. "I'm here, Naya, that doesn't change." Then he left, the room feeling different, somehow less like a cage, more like a space she could breathe in. The day moved slowly. Nia wandered the gardens, her fingers brushing the edges of roses as her thoughts replayed the night, over and over, the way his voice had steadied her, the warmth of his arm around her, the certainty in his words. By evening, she found herself restless. She walked past his study 3 times before stopping at the door. Her hand hovered over the wood before she knocked softly. "Come in," his voice called. She stepped inside. He stood by the fireplace, sleeves rolled up, a glass untouched on the table beside him. His posture was relaxed, but something in his eyes told her he'd been waiting. She didn't sit. He didn't ask her to. "I don't know what this is," she began quietly. "Between us, I don't know what to do with it. He stayed silent, letting her speak. But I know how I feel when I'm around you, she continued. And it's confusing. And terrifying. Darius walked toward her slowly, stopping a step away. Naya, he said, his voice low, you don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not affection, not trust. If you need space, I'll give it to you. If you need time, I'll wait. Her eyes shimmered. That's not what I need. I don't want distance. I just don't know how to do this. He studied her for a moment, his voice quiet. You already are. You let me in. Her lips trembled faintly. Why are you so gentle with me? His answer was simple, certain. Because I love you. The words settled between them like a quiet truth. Her breath caught. You what? I love you, he said again. I tried not to. I didn't expect to. But the way you carry your pain, the way you hold on to your dignity, even when the world takes everything else from you, the way you never ask to be saved even when you're drowning. I love you, Nia, not because of a contract, not because you're my wife on paper, but because you are the strongest, softest soul I've ever known. Tears slipped down her cheeks. You shouldn't say that. You don't know what I'm still hiding. I don't care, he said softly. Whatever it is, I'll help carry it. Her chest tightened, every wall she'd built trembling. I don't know if I love you the way you love me, she admitted. His gaze stayed steady. That's more than enough. You feel safe with me. That's enough. Her forehead rested lightly against his, their breath mingling in the quiet. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if this could be more than survival. The mansion no longer felt like stone and silence. Something had shifted, not in the walls themselves, but in the spaces between them. It began with sound. A soft piano melody drifting through the halls one afternoon, the notes hesitant at first, then stronger. Nia's fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the keys in the music room, a piece she hadn't played in years. Darius didn't interrupt. He leaned quietly against the doorway and listened, his presence steady but unintrusive. Then came scent. Warm cinnamon drifting from the kitchen, lavender carried through the bedrooms, fresh roses arranged in vases that had long been empty. One morning, Naya had wandered into the kitchen, barefoot and shy, and asked the chef if she could bake. The chef had been surprised, but smiled, and soon the staff whispered about her when she passed, not with disdain, but with quiet affection. Her presence, once quiet as a shadow, began to feel like sunlight slipping through heavy curtains. One evening, Darius returned from the city, stepping into the foyer with his briefcase in hand. The scent of lemon scones lingered in the air. Somewhere in the house, he could hear Nia's laughter, light, unguarded, teasing the gardener about roses that refused to bloom. He stood still for a moment, just listening. He had bought this house decades ago, filled it with expensive furniture, protected it like a fortress, but it had never once felt like a home. Until now, her fingerprints were everywhere. Not literal ones, but in the details, the blanket folded on the armchair just the way she liked it, the chipped mug in the kitchen she refused to replace because it had character, the stack of books by the window seat, a half-filled sketchbook of flowers from the garden. He didn't comment on these things, but he noticed. And more than once, he caught himself smiling quietly in rooms she had just left. One afternoon, he found her in the library, sitting on the floor beside the fireplace, reading to one of the maid's young daughters. The little girl sat wide-eyed, clutching a stuffed rabbit, completely enchanted. Darius stayed in the doorway, watching silently. He didn't interrupt. Something in his chest, something long dormant, stirred. That night, they sat together by the fire. Naya curled beside him in one of his sweaters, her hair loose over her shoulders. She leaned into him naturally now, without hesitation. You've changed everything, he said quietly. She smiled softly. No, I just added a little life to what was already beautiful. He shook his head. No, Naya, I had walls and furniture. You gave it a soul. Her gaze softened. This place used to feel like a palace I wasn't allowed to live in. Now, it feels like a nest. A warm place I want to wake up in. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her fingers gently. holding her hand against his chest for a long moment. Days began to fall into unspoken routines. She would leave small notes. For him, on his desk, a flower sketch, a line from a book, a quote she thought he'd like. He would answer in his own way, her favorite chocolate left on her pillow, a bookmark tucked into her current novel, a quiet dinner reservation arranged without her asking. They passed each other in the hall with glances that said more than words. One night after dinner, she surprised him, standing in the center of the unused ballroom, barefoot, and wearing a navy dress that brushed just below her knees. She held out her hand. "Dance with me," he hesitated. "I haven't danced in years." "Neither have I," she smiled. "We'll be clumsy together." He took her hand. Under the glow of the chandelier, they moved not perfectly, not gracefully, but with a presence that made the steps feel effortless. Her cheek rested lightly against his chest, his hand steady at her waist. When the song ended, they didn't step apart. She looked up at him, her voice soft. "Sometimes I forget where I came from when I'm with you." He lowered his forehead to hers. "And sometimes I forget who I used to be." As they walked the hallway later that night, she stopped by the tall windows, looking out at the moonlit garden. "I never imagined this," she whispered. "This?" he asked quietly. "US." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They stood in silence, her fingers slipping into his, and for the first time, neither of them felt the need to let go. The house no longer felt like the cold structure she had entered on her wedding night. It breathed differently now. The walls seemed warmer, the rooms softer. The silence no longer empty, but alive. Evenings were no longer just another mark on the calendar. They were filled with small moments, a quiet meal, laughter that slipped out when neither of them expected it, a fire that burned low as they sat close without needing to speak. Darius moved through the mansion differently now too, not like a man pacing a cage, but like someone who finally had a reason to stay. One evening, the air outside was warm, painted in shades of lavender and gold as the sun set behind the gardens. Naya stood by the window in their room, her arms wrapped gently around herself, looking out at the roses below. From this height they looked like scattered jewels, their petals moving softly in the breeze. She didn't turn when she heard his footsteps behind her. She didn't need to. His presence had become something she could recognize without looking. Darius stepped behind her, his arms circling her waist, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. Their son lay just feet away in a cradle by the fireplace, sleeping in the quiet rhythm only newborns know. "I used to watch the world from behind glass," Naya said softly, "always on the outside. Even when I was surrounded by people, I never felt part of anything." His arms tightened around her just slightly. "And now," she continued, her voice gentler still, "I feel like I've stepped inside the life I used to only imagine." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pressed a slow kiss to her shoulder, not out of urgency, but reverence. "I spent most of my life chasing the wrong kind of legacy," he murmured. "Buildings, deals, control. None of it meant anything." She turned in his arms, her fingers brushing along his jaw, her eyes searching his. And now, his gaze softened. "Now I only care about the two hearts that beat in this house with mine." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, worn at the edges. He placed it in her hand. Nia unfolded it. Slowly, it was a note, her handwriting from months ago. One she had left tucked inside one of his books, when she was still learning how to exist in his world. "Thank you for not breaking me." Her eyes lifted to his. "You kept this. I carry it every day," he said. "It reminds me of who I never want to be again." Her voice was quiet, thick with emotion. "You never broke me, Darius. You rebuilt me piece by piece, word by word." He cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing the corners of her mouth. "I will spend the rest of my life protecting what we've built. You, our son, this home you, gave me more than I ever dreamed I could have." Tears blurred her vision. "And you gave me back to myself." He kissed her then, not with urgency, but with promise. A kiss that said, "I'm not going anywhere. You are my future." Everything I am belongs to us now. When they pulled away, she rested her forehead against his, her voice barely above a whisper. I used to wonder if love like this was real, and now I know it's the only thing that ever was. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, the firelight soft around them. Their son dreaming quietly just a few feet away. The walls that had once echoed with emptiness now held warmth. The rooms that once felt cold now breathed life. And the man who once lived in silence now knew the sound of love spoken in every quiet gesture. For Nia, the life that began as a cage had transformed into a sanctuary. And for Darius, the house that had once been a fortress had become a home. The world, outside, could wait. Inside, everything they needed was right here.